did the number twos do in last night's face-off? Well, let's bring in our panel to break it all down for us. Joining us, Whitley Yates, a Republican strategist, and Taryn Rosenkranz, a Democratic strategist. Thank you both for being with us. Wondering, was there one defining moment that stood out to you last night? Let's start with you, Whitley.
There were a lot of moments that stood out. I'd have to say one of the largest moments that stood out was when Walz was asked about some of his comments regarding his trip to Asia and China, which could have just been an easy, I misspoke, but it turned into a terrible word salad that just seemed very confusing. And I think that that level of accountability is necessary when you're going to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. Also, learning that the administration has lost some migrant children was very startling, which happened in about the first 5 minutes of the debate. Those are two very interesting things that stood out where I felt like people were really watching and paying attention.
Taryn, what's your response?
Yeah, I think the most defining moment was towards the end, the one that you showed the clip of, the damning non-answer. It was really where I thought J.D. Vance did a great job of defending Trump and almost making it seem normal and coherent. And then you get to the part where he's like, well, did he lose the election? And this is where people were looking for that answer, right? They're looking for that, like, okay, let's just make this okay. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't just say that he lost the election, and he couldn't just normalize that. And because of it, January 6th and what was wrong there. And I think that's where he lost people again. And I think that was probably that most defining, moment, and that damning non-answer really just said it all for a lot of people. And that's where maybe you took it back and maybe you got back some moderates and then you lost them again. And I think that for a lot of folks was where you really wrapped it up.
Whitley, there was a moment when Margaret Brennan fact-checked Senator Vance, and then eventually the moderators cut the mics, which they said they were not going to do. Republicans are upset about that fact-check, but as moderators and journalists, why shouldn't moderators fact-check during the debate?
I think the problem with fact-checking is that it seems to only be on one side. And the problem that you end up having is when there's nuance to the conversation, such as in this specific issue, where they were saying, well, the Haitian migrants that have come are citizens and they have a right. Well, they're not citizens, but they have a right to work because they do have temporary protective status. What he was attempting to say is, well, they only have temporary protective status because of the laws and the repealing of certain laws within this administration. Any other time, this would not have happened, but because of this leadership, it has. And they did not seem to want to allow that answer, or the fact that it seemed like the question had been grandstood by both of the candidates. I think that moderators do have a right to go ahead and wrangle in both parties, both candidates when you're at a debate. However, if you're going to fact check, just make sure that the fact check is balanced and you're doing it for both sides.
Taryn, one thing that stood out to me, and I think everybody, is how much civility we saw. At one point, we saw Senator Vance actually apologize to Governor Walz about his son witnessing a shooting. He was surprised by that. They both said they agreed with the other on certain topics. And I have to wonder, is this what the American people want to get back to?
I think so. I really do. There is a return to civility that I think everyone wants in politics, right? It's what we're all looking for, this return to calm. I actually think that part of the reason there has been such movement towards Kamala is because people are looking for a return to calm, towards a return to common sense policies, towards this just no longer this chaos, this turmoil. They're looking for an opportunity economy. They're looking towards, like, how can we stop having all this divisiveness, and how can we return to talking about how we can get back to, being friends with each other and having good conversations, and a return towards the way things were before when we weren't at each other, always at odds with each other, excuse me. And I think that that's something that we saw last night, and I appreciated that, and I think most folks folks appreciated that. I was actually watching it with my teenage son, and he was like, "Oh, wow, look at this. This is good. This is dignified." And I think that was really important to a lot of people. And I'm glad that it happened that way, quite honestly. And I do believe in fact checking, because I do believe it's really important that we don't let lies stand. Disinformation is something that happens very quickly in this day and age. And I think it's really, really important that we don't let lies stand.
Whitley, Senator Vance was certainly polished. He presented his case in a measured way, very different style from Donald Trump and what we usually see from him. Do you think it was Vance's strategy to go out on that stage and make the more extreme parts of Trump's message softer, more palatable to a wider audience?
I think that Trump's message is more palatable, and I think that J.D. Vance, being the vice president, was able to convey that as one of the key messengers within this administration. And so when you think about what we saw, I think America as a whole really overestimated Walz and underestimated Vance. I think that they expected Vance to faceplant based upon his perception and how he's viewed in the media. And I think that they expected Walz based upon the very few interviews that we've seen him in, but just this round the way guy to really excel. And that's not what we saw. We saw Vance being polished, being sharp, and honestly having his numbers accurate and being ready to retort. There were moments of synergy and civility, honestly, with Walz agreeing with Vance and his policy positions more often than not, which I thought was a very great sign. One of the things that the former contributor just said was this idea of calmness and bringing back calmness. Well, we've had a lot of calmness, honestly, in the White House over the past 4 years with Biden, maybe a little too calm, maybe a little flatline, if you ask me. And so I think that it's great that we are actually in a place where we can debate policies now without debating over people's personality.
And I'll just add that it wasn't just Walz agreeing with Vance, that Vance at times agreed with Walz too. Whitley Yates and Taryn Rosenkranz, thank you so much for joining us here tonight and unpacking all of this.